Oh, hey. What's up, guys? How you doing? Tonight's episode is another true crime episode, which I'm going to start dubbing these the True A.S. crime episodes. You like that? Tonight's episode's a lot to chew. No pun intended. But we definitely want to jump into this one with a disclaimer. Once again, there's going to be graphic details shared here about these killings, and I don't want you to be offended or upset. So if that's not your type of episode and you do find these things hard to stomach, then please don't watch this episode. We're going to be talking about serial killer Joe Metheny tonight, and let's just jump right into it. But before we do, sorry to be eating on this episode, but I am just so hungry. I'm a big old fat guy. Speaking of big old fat guys, Joe Metheny. I don't know if how you pronounce it is Metheny, but that's how I've always said it. So let's just go ahead and go, yeah, dude, it's Joe Metheny. And if you don't like it, sorry. So Joe Metheny was born in, I made notes this time. Joe Metheny was born in March 2nd of 1955 in Baltimore, Maryland. His father was known to be an alcoholic, passed away when he was 6 years old, when Joe was 6 years old. And his mother then was left to raise Joe and his 5 siblings, so 6 kids altogether. He felt neglected a lot. He was a victim of his childhood. They'd bounce around from house to house, unofficially like foster care systems, but more like friends would kind of take them in, family would kind of take them in. And he had this overall sense that his mom neglected him. According to his mother, on the other hand, she didn't neglect him. She did the best she could. She had to work multiple jobs to afford all the kids, and she was alone. Her husband had passed away. She was a widow at the time. So she'd work as a waitress and odd jobs, a food truck driver, things like that. So according to Joe, his life was very sad, and he had a troubled upbringing. And that his mom was dead, which we know that not to be true. So there's another disclaimer I need to make, is that Joe kind of seemed like a big fat liar. Did I mention his size yet? He was 6'1", 450 pounds. This is what he looked like. Big dude. And so when I make these big fat liar jokes, you know that I mean, I mean it. So it's kind of hard to decipher. And as you're doing research on this case, or as I was doing research, watching other videos, documentaries, and even looking up just information on websites and online, everything's kind of conflicting because the truth and Joe's truth and other people's truth all don't seem to kind of line up. And you're going to notice that throughout this entire story. So I don't know what's true. I'm not trying to give wrong information. I'm definitely not trying to spoon feed you guys at all ever on this show. And this is no different. So I don't know if all these things are 100% like on the level. So I just wanted to state that. So take another bite. Meat's good. So now that we established that Joe's kind of a liar and he already kind of talked about his childhood differently, let's just jump into 1973 when he joined the military. He was stationed in Germany. His mom, remembers Germany. He claims Vietnam. But the American involvement in Vietnam in 1973 came to a close. So let's go ahead and just say that that's probably not true. But the point of him being in the military is that's when he got his first love of heroin, and now a full-blown alcoholic. He was known to put down a bottle a night. Joe was also known to be overly intelligent, overly polite. Joe was also known as the ironic name of Tiny, kind of like Little John on Robin Hood, where in fact, in real life, John was pretty big. He wasn't little at all. And he was a forklift driver at a factory, and he held down a good job, and he had a nice little home. And then he also got married, and he had a son. And it seemed like everything was okay. I mean, beside the fact that he was addicted to heroin and the mother, his wife, was addicted to heroin, and this poor child's like living in this, you talk about how bad your childhood is, but I digress. He comes home from work one day, and this is what really, according to Joe in interviews I've watched, catapulted him into this murdering frenzy, and the reason why we're talking about him today. He came home, and at the time his son was 6 years old, but the house was empty. All the furniture was removed, and while he was at work, his wife jetted out of there. So for about 6 months or so, I don't know if he was like looking for his family or not looking for his family, but 6 months or so goes by, and he's in a homeless tent camp where he used to hang out with sex workers and homeless people in camps, and that's where he would find his drugs. So he was, hanging out, doing heroin with people, things like that. And one of the guys there mentions, "Hey, I know where your wife is. She hooked up with this other dude. They're living in this other homeless tent can." He goes, "Where's my son?" And oh, well, turns out that the system took him because your son was being abused and neglect and all these things. So holding in that dark anger he had, being overly polite to everybody, it finally reared its evil head. He went over to the camp. He saw two gentlemen. Couldn't find the names of these victims at all anywhere. So I'm not trying to be insensitive because, like I said, I don't want to give wrong information. He went over to the homeless camp and confronted these two gentlemen and said, "Hey, have you seen my wife?" And they're like, "Nah, dude, ain't seen that chick anywhere, And he's like, "I don't believe you. I believe you guys have had relations with my wife now that she's a sex worker and you sold her drugs and blah, blah, blah." And so, he leaves angrily, but he just leaves to go get an axe, comes back and unfortunately just brutally murders these guys. And I'm putting it lightly and putting it on content lightly. He definitely dismembers these gentlemen. And according to him, this is his first murders. Well, he sees a sex worker walking up and asks her the same thing. "Have you seen my wife?" "Well, no." "Well, I don't believe you either." Assaults her and then murders her. All within the same time period, by the way. This is all the same night. Well, as he's hiding her body in the bushes, he hears another person. He looks and it's another worker, and he then unfortunately murders this young lady. And then there's a fisherman down there, and he goes, "I don't know if the fisherman saw anything or not, but just in case, I should probably murder that guy as well." And I'm not, like I said, trying to be insensitive going fisherman, sex worker, and homeless guys. I'm just saying I don't know who these guys are. So he murders that gentleman. And then, he kind of tries to hide the crimes a little bit. He puts the one gal in the bush and dismembers these guys. And then he takes one of the dude's heads and buries it. And then I think he takes a couple of the gentlemen and he puts cinder blocks on them and tries to weigh them down in the river. And this is supposedly his first murders ever. It seems a little hard to believe, but at the same time, like, I don't know what's hard to believe about it. Is it the fact that he was able to do all this way? I mean, spree murders happen and stuff for sure, but also like, these are your first killings and you're so that is brutal. And I get drugs and I get alcohol, but that's a horrible, I don't know. It's one of the reasons why I do these episodes is like, I can't fathom what brings someone to do something so terrible. He ends up getting arrested for this a couple weeks later. They tie him to the murders and you're like, okay, cool. Hell yeah, dude. It's done. It's over with. We're good. Episode done, right? Unfortunately, no. He spends about a year and a half or so, over a year anyway, in prison and then gets acquitted because they just didn't have enough evidence to tie him to the murders. They only tried him for the two guys, by the way. They didn't find any other bodies at the scene, I guess. Even later on, he brought people down to that scene when he was, apprehended in 1996 later. And they couldn't find any of the other bodies either. So I thought that was kind of strange, and it does speak for multiple things. Like, there's a reason why a lot of these sadistic serial killers go for, sex workers or homeless people or what people that society deems not worthy of society or lower than them. And these are people, whatever circumstances they're in, we're still all just people. What's even probably more sad is that he sat in prison and instead of thinking about what he'd done, he was quoted to go, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he said that, he realized that the first night was a crime of like passion. It was a frenzy almost. And he realized he really liked it and he wanted to commit more murder. So I'm going to take another bite of this real quick. It's so good. Coming to his newfound awareness of what he loves or not, he moves forward to now luring these workers over to his house on the promise of them doing drugs together. And he ends up murdering these people. Now, I want to put it out there that he said he killed anywhere between 10 to 13 people. It's hard for us to know if he actually killed 13 people or not. He was only convicted of 2, later tied by evidence to 3 more murders. But everything's fabricated and kind of like this drug-minded thing. One murder we know for sure was Kathy Ann Maganizer. That was in 1994. She actually was buried on the property of the factory that he worked at. Her body would lay there for about 2 years before she was discovered. He was, like I said, apprehended in 1996. He would later go back 6 months after he buried her and dig her up and then decapitate her. And then he was said to have tossed her head in the trash. But other reports I found is that they were able to identify Kathy due to the dental record. So if her head was gone, once again, I just don't know. One thing he said he would do with his victims when he lured them to the house, he would dismember them and then he would cut their muscle off and then put it in Tupperware and then store it in his freezer. Okay. Which I don't know why people do that. Seems like a lot of people do that. Another murder that we know for sure was Kimberly Lynn Spicer. The evidence that we know about her is that he actually asked a friend at work to help him bury Kimberly's body. She was only buried for about a month, but also at the factory. He'd bury his victims in shallow graves after he said he would dismember them and basically harvest meat from their bodies. The owner of the business was actually the one that was arrested with Metheny. So there was definitely some justice for Kimberly right off the bat, which just makes you kind of think like how many people could have been involved in this. And once again, how many people are willing to do that sort of thing. It's terrible and it's creepy. It's creepy as hell. And so the last one I want to say is kind of a bittersweet ending. He kidnapped a gal named Rita Kemper, brought her over to the house, promised her with the promise of drugs, and then did what he tried to do. He hit her over the head, proceeded to try to assault her, thought that she was, gone, deceased, or, at least knocked out. She ended up waking up and getting out of the house. I've read one report where he then grabbed her, brought her back in the house, and then I've heard another where she just simply escaped at that moment. I would like to believe that one, just for the heart of it all. And he had an 8-foot length fence around his property, so I thought, she can't get out. She actually was able to jump the fence, and lucky for her, she got away. She flagged down a truck driver, went to the nearest place where she can call the authorities, and quickly he was arrested. Knowing that Rita had escaped, he knew the jig was up, and that's when he called his other friend to see if he can try to move the body of Kimberly before they can find it. Luckily, he was apprehended after Rita escaped on December 15th, 1996. Otherwise, who knows how many more victims he would have. Luckily, he died on August 5th of 2017 in his jail cell. He was 62 years old. There were a lot of people who were victims in this story, and we're definitely going to get to that in a second too, which kind of ties in the fact that I've been eating cheeseburgers this entire time. This is what put him into the list of the most sadistic or overly interesting, and it's hard to know if this is true or not. One thing he would do is he would take the meat of his victims and mix it with pork or beef, like brisket, and to make extra money, probably to fund his drug habit, he would make a meat stand and sell to truckers and people who drove by these sandwiches that were laced with his victims, kind of like hiding their bodies within other people's bodies was the way that someone put it. And I thought, man, what a terrifying thing to think that you go to this truck stop, you go to this place to buy a sandwich, and you're actually eating human flesh. It's hard to say if he did this or not, but he said he did. And given the nature of all of his crimes, it's on the believable side. He's even gone on to inspire Mr. Meat, which is there's actually 2 of them now, but it's a Spanish video game of a butcher or a man who kills people and sells them at rec stops. So he's gone down in the history books as Mr. Meat. And it's just terrible when you think about how many people unknowingly ate some of his victims. And we live in a time now, I mean, this isn't the mid-90s. This is 2024 now. Food trucks are very popular. And it makes you just kind of wonder, where do they get their meat? How many of these people that we see every day have done things? Like, how many laws have you broken? How many times have you bed in your car when you weren't caught for it or given a ticket for it. So it's believable that he had committed this many more murders, especially with people that society deemed to be low in the totem pole of importance. Homeless people, sex workers. There's a reason why prostitutes are always normally victims, especially in the 70s and that era, where they just were thought of as nothing, like throwaways. So people could disappear all the time. And in these homeless tent camp communities, people disappear all the time. They travel on, they move on. So people get picked away and you never know. And it's really creepy to me to think that someone did this, and it just kind of makes you second guess. Like, are you going to go eat at a food truck and not think about this next time? Are you able to even eat at a restaurant and not think about this? He's definitely not the only one who's done this. This has been in our culture many, many, many times. And it's a terrible story. It really is a terrible story. And the fact that he had lied about so many things, I hope he was. I hope he was lying. I hope he was just trying to commit fear into you. I hope he, you know what I mean? To make it long lasting, to make himself more important, I don't know. And that's why I wanted to do this story. And that's why I wanted to talk about him in particular. I told you guys I was going to try to go a little outside the norm of the normal known serial killers, because I like sharing stories of these people, because it makes you think, who do we rub shoulders with in our communities? Who are the butchers? Who are these food truck suppliers? You know what I mean? And is there a weird connection between that and his mother? If you remember back in the beginning of the episode, I said she drove a food truck. And it just kind of seems like that's a dot that's a stretch to connect, but you just never know. And is that where he got the idea? Was he eating one of her burgers when he was a child and thought, you never know. These things are very, they're fascinating and they're terrible. And that's that. So I appreciate you guys very, very much for watching this episode. Hope you like the content. I'm going to make it whether you do or not. And I just want to say, my hearts go out to all the victims. This is one planet. And man, see you guys next time.